Greetings, everyone. My name is David McLeod. I am your Life Mastery Coach. Welcome to Soul Empowerment. And today we are going to be talking about a topic that's related to personal growth, personal awareness, personal identity, calling this compassionate self-reflection. And I'm going to invite my co-hosts one at a time to go around the circle that I see on my screen. Today I'm going to go in a counterclockwise direction. And so the first person on my screen is Nancy. Nancy, please introduce yourself and tell us what you do and where you are located.
All right. I'm Nancy Stevens. I am located in Nashville, Tennessee area, just kind of down the road. I am a well-being specialist. I'm a co-host here. I am just starting a new show that will air every other Sunday, starting this Sunday, Vibrant Wellbeing. I'm a blogger and an author, and I do well-being coaching as well. I'm also the founder of a skincare company called Uplift Clean Beauty. So all things self-care and well-being are in my realm.
Oh, thank you, Nancy. That's beautiful. Thank you for being here.
Yeah.
Next in my circle is Sarah. Sarah, please introduce yourself. Tell us what you do and where you're located.
Hello, right, I'm Sarah Jane. I'm in UK in a little town called Bournemouth. And it's a town, not a city. And it's on the south coast of the UK. I'm a complementary therapist, the founder of Gift of Healing TV, and the only host of Gift of Healing TV. We share lots of interviews, meditations, exercises. We also have a couple of different types of program, Thoughtful Nuggets and Pearls, so I suppose a little bit similar to this, but a lot shorter. And today's conversation, which I host with my co-host, Enolia, we've got that straight after this program, which is always why I have to vanish quite just before the end of this program, because my program almost follows straight on from this one. And also creator of Vocal Reiki. I love working with sound energy, but it's the use of the voice, it's toning, which I find very powerful. Yes, I write, I channel mythical beings, dragons. I think, as with all of us, we all have more than one string to our bow. So that's a little bit about me.
Great. Well, thank you, Sarah. And I noticed, just for those who are looking at the chat, you posted a link there. That is for a show you're doing today. Is that for today's show or for something?
That's the one with today's conversation that we're doing at 7:30 p.m. because I'm in the UK, which I think you said was 2:30 Eastern.
Right. Okay, great. Well, thank you for sharing that link. And people, if they're interested, they can go and register there. And last, but certainly by no means least, Christy Borst. Welcome, Christy. Tell us what you do and where you're located.
Thank you, David. Hi, everyone. I am located in Wells, Maine, which is about an hour and a half from Boston. And I am an integrative energy healer and emotional healer. My gifts lie in the realm of what I call quantum healing, which can go beyond this time and space to childhood, to past lives, to ancestral and karmic healing, and to helping the person understand if they do have physical pain or disease, what the root of that is, and shifting that root so that the body's natural healing can get back online and repair. I have my own process, which is called Perspective Reboot. And I also have a podcast by that name, Perspective Reboot, which is available on all the major streaming things. So check that out. I also have a lot of free stuff on my site in terms of empowerment blogs and healing videos. I'm a fractal artist. There's a couple of the things I've created behind me here. And I just love sharing and empowering because I know we're all important here and we all have a note to play. And if we're in pain or if we're struggling, we can't play that in an undistorted way.
Right. Well, beautiful. Thank you, Christy. And as you can tell, all these beautiful ladies are much more educated and qualified than I am. I'm just glad to be able to share space with them. And I want to speak for a moment to the folks who are here on the live presentation. I want to thank you for being here. And just let you know that if you have comments or questions during our presentation, feel free to just put them into the chat. If you don't see the chat, then there may be a little link at the top on the top left of your screen says public chat. I think you just open that up, and then down at the bottom, there's a little place you can start typing. So feel free to share your perspectives with us. So I say, why don't we just dive right in? We're talking today about compassionate self-reflection. And, you know, this is a topic that I find interesting because, first of all, we have two components. The component of self-reflection, which is really a powerful topic unto itself, and then the concept of compassion. And we're bringing those together. Compassion, of course, being one of those powerful life mastery keys that when you learn how to use it properly can have a really powerful impact on healing the world and healing yourself and you know, providing those ripples of help to the world. So I guess the first thing we need to talk about is, what does self-reflection mean? What is that exactly? How do we do it? And you know, maybe we can come up with a little definition. And what are we talking about when we talk about the self? Opening the floor here. Who would like to dive in?
I'd like to jump in here. Let's go into an example that happened to me a couple of years ago. Something triggered me, and it was just like, okay, why did that trigger me? What was I feeling? What was I going through? And what is it? There must have been something in my past that caused that trigger. And although I can sort of remember the person that did it to me, and it was to do with interviews and things, what I felt was that I was not being listened to. And I do find it, being an interviewer, I find it very important to listen to my guests. How am I going to do a proper interview if I don't? So it was the listening. And I hadn't felt listened to, and I hadn't felt heard. And it was just like, okay, where did that come from? Why was I triggered with this? And I realized that it went back to what I refer to as my wake-up call. But I also realized that it went back further than that. It went back to what happened to me as a child, that baby in hospital crying for her mother and not getting her mother. I wasn't being listened to. And so I wasn't going into any form of judgment of myself, of why I'd been triggered. It was, okay, it was listening to myself. It was really important to listen. And when I understood all of that, I was then able to work with that. So it was having the compassion rather than going into judgment. It was, okay, it was being sufficiently caring of the self and my story.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you. And I just want to point out that in your case, in the example that you just gave, you were able to trace that back to something that happened in early childhood. And very often that happens for all of us, actually. We have things that happen when we were kids, and perhaps even infants, that had such a strong impact on us, and we don't even realize it, but we made some kind of a compensatory change in our lives in order to be able to accommodate and be able to live within the confines and the constructs and the conditioning of our lives. So we develop strategies, coping mechanisms, all these kinds of things in order to be able to live our lives in a way that doesn't really disrupt other people. So that's kind of what we do. The problem is, of course, and I think you pointed this out, is just because we learn to cope and just because we develop strategies that may actually have worked, so to speak, doesn't mean that they actually helped us in the way that we hoped it would. We may have simply covered over. we may have simply hidden something away and not dealt with the pain, not dealt with the trauma or the injury that happened. And so it's still been festering away all these years. And so sooner or later it's going to come out, and that's what we see happening. So as adults, we may get triggered and we may just react to the trigger and not necessarily know where it came from. And some of us might say, well, I don't care where it came from. It's your fault. You caused the trigger. That's kind of how we live our lives. So I think that's really good, Sarah, that you were able to do that self-reflection and find some kind of, perhaps not the cause, but a cause or something that happened in your life that could explain future behaviors. Christy, I notice you look like you're about ready to pop there. So why don't you go ahead and speak?
I want to go to really that question you asked of what is the self? And I would think for many of us, I know certainly for me, that's an evolving definition. I think when I was a child, the self to me was my body, my container identification. It was also a level of disempowerment because I was controlled by other people. I didn't have a lot of power in my childhood, as many of us don't. And so I think to me, the self is that emerging part of us that wants to improve, that knows there's something more, that seeks growth, that seeks awareness. And I think part of that self-awareness or self-reflection is to realize that we have done things on autopilot or just reacted in certain ways without even thinking about it. And that's part of surviving. But part of thriving is to really look at the things that cause us unease and as empowered adults, changing the script within ourselves, because that self is really the only one we can change, and we almost the only one we have permission to change in a spiritual way.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. I'm going to come back to that in a second, but I want to give Nancy a chance to say something here.
Well, I'm kind of feeding off what both you said, Sarah and Christy, that oftentimes as we are raising ourselves or being raised from our infancy through young adulthood and adulthood, we unknowingly or knowingly take on the postures and the teaching of those who are responsible for managing, guiding, and raising us, thinking that that was the way to be, without really learning who we are, who we're meant to be from the inside out. And then all of a sudden you're dropped into adulthood, maybe working, married, and doing all these things. And then you start to maybe find these little things that really catch your attention, maybe in the form of anger, frustration, quick to be defensive, or sadness. And those were perhaps all the parts that you put conditions in front of, made allowances for, just accepted, that are kind of starting to knock at the door, that are asking us to, once we become aware of that, to begin to pause and notice, like you said, Sarah, why is this causing me to be, to be annoyed or triggered or frustrated? And that's the point that people kind of sometimes get stuck at. We're wanting to lay what we're feeling externally outside of us. Well, I would be fine if it wasn't for the world events or my spouse or partner or coworkers, when in reality, it's really not the case at all. It's beginning to give yourself compassionate permission to go to really explore that. And it takes a while to learn that, to move from being externally focused to really wanting to go deep within the soil of who we are on the inside. And that's a big deal. I think that's ongoing too, by the way. Every time we experience things in life, we, like you said, we finish one area and we get to complete it and go back around and continue. But yeah, the self is really who we're meant to flourish, thrive, and be. So yeah.
Right. I think one of the things that I have learned in my own experience of personal growth, this concept of self, I actually think there are two primary instances of the self. And one of them is all lowercase letters, S-E-L-F. And that's really dominated by the ego mind. And then the other one is all capital letters, S-E-L-F. And for me, I've just created a backronym for that I say the spiritually empowered life force. And that, I believe, is what we really are, is that essence, that spiritual essence that just happens to be residing, as Christy says, in this physical container for a temporary period of time. And if we can understand that we have those two selves operating, and that we can, with practice, learn to quiet down the little lowercase self and start to empower the uppercase self, which is really what we're all about here in soul empowerment, right? When we can learn to do that, our lives can just transform amazingly. And then the concept of self-reflection takes on a whole new meaning that really makes it very exciting. When you're looking at self-reflection from the perspective of just diving into what the ego believes and stuff, some of what you find isn't all that pretty. You know, some of the stories that you discover about yourself are maybe pretty dark, and you say, man, I can't believe I ever did that, you know? And yet they were just part of the journey of this physical life, learning how to survive, learning how to make it from one place to the next, which I think helps us to grow and grow and grow in the physical sense, to the point where we ultimately say, hey, that's not working anymore. There's got to be something better and something beyond. And that's where we end up diving into this whole spiritual ocean out there, trying to learn the truth about who we really are. So this is an amazing topic, and I'm really glad we decided to bring it up. So, you know, does that resonate for you guys? I mean, you ladies.
Can I make one other point that came through, I think, when Sarah was speaking, and that's about that whole essence of like self-reflection. And I think back to when I was a child, and I would like, you know, I'm an empath, which, you know, some people would say I'm sensitive. My family said I was too sensitive, but that's part of why I'm here, is to be sensitive. But I would like journal. And I know like a lot of those self-reflective prompts for me would be, why is somebody else doing this? Why did that person treat me this way? Why, you know, it was all this kind of like outward. What did I do that made them do that? And what I think I want to just clarify is that there's more power in just, and we talk about compassionate self-reflection, that compassion can go out to the other people, and we can say, okay, they're in some sort of pain, so I'm going to be compassionate to them, but I'm not going to take on that pain. Right. I'm going to be in my presence of, I am joy, I am peace, and what's happening around me does not have to define how I feel.
Exactly.
That's a big learning piece of the puzzle, because so many of us, as we are growing and evolving, feel that it's our job, or we knowingly or unknowingly take on what's going on around with intimate circle or less, and enfold ourselves in that. So it can be hard to discern and move through and out of that. And like I said, I think that type of energy, it pretty much is nonstop. And it's just up to us to begin to, like, what I learn is to pause when I'm really feeling emotional or triggered, and to ask, you know, what am I meant to learn from this conversation or situation that I'm wanting to forecast it externally. But that's one of the tools that I use, is what is this situation or moment meant to show up in my life to teach me, and how can I open up my perspective instead of seeing it as poor me to, oh, it's my time to learn from this, to grow and expand.
What if your part of your job or lesson, Nancy, is just to be peace in that moment? It's not that you need to learn anything. It's just that you need to be vibing out peace.
That's a good,
So, sometimes it's not that you don't know enough. It's that we're just being called to just be present as peace. And that's a win-win, because then we get to be living in peace. So try that too.
Well, that's beautiful, and I really like that.
I like that.
And at the same time, I wanted to just point out to Nancy, I really like the question that you asked. What is it that I am intended, or that life is intending for me to learn right now? I like that kind of question rather than why am I suffering right now? Because when you go into the why question, then you always have to come back with a because answer, and you have to you kind of have to justify what's going on. That's part of the ego mind's trickery, by the way. Very often the ego mind has to find a cause and effect relationship between any two things. Whether that cause and effect relationship really exists or not, the ego mind is going to say, this caused that. And very rarely does the ego mind ever say, well, what caused this? The ego mind doesn't go that far back. I remember reading books by David R. Hawkins, who you may have heard of him. He's a pretty amazing guy, a high consciousness individual. And he believes that there is no cause and effect. There's just what is, And I find, okay, my ego mind says, no, that can't be right. But spiritually, there's a part of me that says, I think he's onto something here. So when I allow my spirit to just listen to that idea, it's kind of like what Christy is saying. Can I just be peace right now while I have all these crazy thoughts going on in my head? Beautiful. It's beautiful. Sarah, what are you thinking about this?
No, what Nancy said was exactly, I suppose, what I did. It wasn't a why or whatever. It was just like, okay, there's something. Whether it was teach me, I've got to learn from this, it's time for me to remember, whatever terminology you wish to use. And rather than saying anything to the individual at that time, I didn't. But I did, because we connected again, because there was something else happening. I said to him, before we even start, I want to give you a very big thank you. And I explained what had happened. Because sometimes it is important that there is somebody that brings that trigger. But it's also, isn't it, about, there's that saying, we have to unlearn everything that we feel we've been taught, so that we can go back and that we can find the true self. Because because of the experiences we've had, everything we've been taught isn't necessarily literally sitting down and being at school. It's those life experiences, the what's gone on in a family, siblings born, siblings died, because I've had that happen too. It's everything that has happened in our lives, the experiences that we've had, our perception of things, even our perception of words and our understanding of words. There is an awful lot for us to unlearn, so that we can let go of that stuff and be able to, for want of a better way of putting it, step into who we truly feel we are. Because it is about the feelings. You talked about the book and the thing. Yes, maybe that is something. Reading books, and when I read the books and I get that feeling, that gut feeling, this is right. This is exactly what it's about. This is the answer I know deep within me. And that is an amazing feeling to get. It's almost as if the universe is speaking to you and saying, this is right for you. And I think that's what we also have to understand is those things are right for me. It doesn't mean they're right for everybody else.
Right. Yeah. Well,
I
you
love the
talked about,
unlearning part.
and I want to come back. Oh, I'm sorry, Nancy, go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. I was just going to say, I love the aspect of seeing ourselves in the process of learning and unlearning. I know when I was doing my yoga teacher training, that was the big thing that was always shared was you're unlearning right now in order to learn. And that really struck me because we walk through lives initially with so many preconceived concepts or energy or postures that what's truly the self is lying underneath all of that. And it's a really, really good process.
I just added a little comment there in the chat.
Well, it's interesting, and Christy, you kind of alluded to this with the idea of learning. I don't know that I don't particularly like the idea or the belief that all of life is a school and it's just a place for us to learn the truth and stuff. I think it's more accurate to say life is a series of experiences that help us to understand and experience and express the truth of who we really are. That's how I see life. Now, is there some learning that happens? Well, I guess by some definition of the word learning. But what is learning really other than just simply becoming aware of something? Sarah, you were talking about how sometimes somebody can actually be the cause of a trigger. And I think to myself, that is a cause for celebration, because what that person is doing is bringing to my awareness an aspect of myself that I haven't paid enough attention to. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a trigger at all. The other person maybe doesn't even know me well enough to be able to pull my triggers and push my buttons, as we say. But the fact of the matter is, my buttons may still get pushed. I may have internal reactions to things that have nothing to do with the person who supposedly did the pushing or the triggering. So we can't blame other people for it. Well, we can, I suppose, but that's not really a productive activity. What we can do instead, if we choose, is to say, I'm having a reaction right now. What's that all about? And why is this person the one that happens to be the one that can trigger this for me? What is it about this person that reminds me about something else? That's where we can really start to raise our awareness. And when we can do this reflectively and compassionately, then we can do it without pointing fingers of blame or shame or anything else at the other person. And hopefully not point fingers of blame at ourselves either, but rather to just simply say, that happened and I reacted this way and I created this strategy for living with it. And then I carried that strategy forward into my life and it's not really working for me anymore. And that's why the trigger keeps coming up. Now, if you can do that and not be angry at yourself for it, and just give yourself a big hug, and love yourself and bring compassion, what's going to happen? Well, that's when healing is going to happen.
And I
really
think
all healing is just returning to wholeness, right?
That's a good way to look at it. Yeah.
I think for most of us too, those people, places, and things are there like throughout our lives, but we're not always ready to see them and receive the trigger, right? And the trigger comes when we're ready to see it. So this is, I think, part of self-compassion, to never really beat yourself up about why didn't I get this, 5 years ago, 10 years ago,
40 years ago, 50 years ago.
like there's so many aspects to that, because we're not in a vacuum. We're in this collective, and we're in energy. We are energy. So the energy now is really supporting a lot of this growth and movement, so that things are releasing much easier than 5 or 10 years ago. Maybe you could have noticed it then, but it would have been so much harder to work through it. So just love when it does show up.
Yeah, that's nice. Beautiful.
And I was going to say that's probably was a big revelation for me as I was in the process of developing and becoming, that learning to have a different lens instead of being externally focused. Well, this event caused me to be, upset or sad, or that person said that they annoy me, or, instead of, again, throwing little darts that everyone and everything was causing me to, quote, be triggered, beginning to, with help and guidance from others, to say, wait a minute, it's move inward with love rather than seeing yourself as you against this. To start being really curious from a place of compassion, and put on your detective hat and ask, what about this is again causing me to have these set of feelings or emotions? So I think that's another tool of pausing to give yourself permission to explore that, versus pushing it aside, or just saying, oh, here it goes again. My balance has been cut off by this or that. So that was a big journey for me, to be curious with compassion, to question or wonder about these the quote causes of that.
I love how you said using a different lens too. That's I love that.
Yeah.
Visual, because it is, again, like the ego self versus the higher self or true self. They have different pairs of glasses, and they look at different things.
Yeah. So that was a really big. David and I, we'd been talking about this back in the day when it was just you and I, and so much to use these visual tools or felt tools to go inward and work on these things that maybe we were, I was raised, don't question, just do, go with the flow, be, get everything done. And well, that's great. But if you're constantly going with the flow, supposedly, where is your personal growth and learn and development? How is that going to have time to set in if you're constantly going with the flow? Actually, I think that is sometimes can be very detrimental. That energy.
Well, as long as we're talking about metaphors here, let's talk about this idea of going with the flow is wonderful, allowing yourself to flow with life and all the rest of it. But I want to just point out that sometimes in order to live your life, you have to swim against the current.
Mm-hmm.
And the obvious metaphor I will pick is salmon. They swim upstream against the current, against very, very high odds, in order to get back to their homeland so that they can lay their eggs and keep life going. Imagine if they just went with the flow. I think we wouldn't be enjoying salmon for much longer. You know what I'm saying? So going with the flow, I mean, I understand what they mean with, sometimes life has its own current and its own I don't know what's the word, intention for you. But when strange things happen, I know that many times in my life I've had obstacles show up in my life. Well, if I just go with the flow, then what am I going to do? I'm going to ram into those obstacles. Who knows what's going to happen? Sometimes an obstacle is put there to find out how serious I am about what I said I wanted to do. The universe is saying, oh, is that what you want? Well, let's just find out if you're serious about that. And so an obstacle shows up. And some people quit. Some people do something else. Some people say to hell with you and find a way around, over, under, or through that obstacle and move on towards what they want. Flow doesn't mean that your flow and my flow are necessarily parallel.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just my thinking. But I also want to come back to one other thing, and that's this whole notion of how we frame. You talked about using a different lens and how we frame things. Sometimes the way we choose our words, and I know Sarah mentioned this, the words that we choose kind of indicate our mindset. So when I have something happen to me, I could say, oh, Christy, you did this and it made me feel blah, blah, blah. In other words, I'm putting the cause of my feeling onto something Christy did, right? It's very subtle language, and it's common language. It's language that we use all the time in just common discourse. But a more accurate way might be something like, Christy, when you did such and such, I noticed I had an internal reaction. I had an internal reaction. This is just me having a reaction. But I want to share this with you, Christy, because there's some learning here for me. I'm not sure what it is yet, and maybe I'll figure it out as we proceed. But right now, I'm just letting you know that I'm feeling this, and right now, I just want to take a little bit of distance from you and then kind of do some processing. Then I'll come back and talk. What I'm doing is I'm taking responsibility for my own feeling, my own reaction, and I'm trying not to put it on Christy. Now, I'm not going to tell you that my words will always be perfect. Sometimes I will mess up, and I'll somehow maybe it'll be a little slimy, and I'll drop a little bit of stuff on her by accident. And I won't necessarily realize that right away. But with self-reflection, and if I can do this compassionately, I might be able to come to the truth and say, oh yeah, I see what I did now. I see what I did. Now I can come back to Christy and I can say, this is what happened. Your words reminded me of my mom when I was 5 years old, and I got very scared. I got very angry at the same time, and I, had a temper tantrum and blah, 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 whatever. And I could feel that energy coming up in my body. And she might decide, thank you for telling me that. I'm now I'll be a little bit more careful about how I approach you about topics like this. She might say, good for you for learning, and not change a thing. It doesn't matter. The whole point is that this is all about our mutual interactions, our relationships, and our self-growth. That's what it's about.
I think it's really important to realize that there are some times when it's really important. It's the universe giving you that nudge. The individual that did what they did, whether when I said the thank you and explained, whether they took that on board and realized they really weren't listening to people, or was it just me? Was it deliberately done by the universe? Were they put there to help me to see it? There was no anger, there was no animosity, there was just a thank you. Thank you for doing what you did. Because actually it really helped me with my healing journey. And I refer to it as a healing journey because it doesn't necessarily start from the baby. It could start with an adult or the teenager or the 20-year-old. It could start anywhere in your life. But it's those little things that crop up when, I think it was Christy that was saying, it was they crop up at different times. Why do they crop up at different times? Because it's the right time. It is the time for you at that point in time. Why don't things crop up earlier? Yeah, why did I stay in my marriage for so long? Why did I do this? Why did I do it? They are a waste of time, the whys, because it is all in the past.
That's right.
What can that trigger support me with? I think we use the word learn because the many people understand the word learn. But for me, we're not here to learn, we're here to remember. What life is teaching us is how to remember who we are.
Right.
Lovely.
Yeah. And that's when I guess there you go. There's the compassion. element that is woven into that, because again, as we're learning and growing, a tendency can be to look harshly at our thoughts and feelings from that external perspective and doing it with more of a negative, low-lying energy. But when we open up the energy of being more loving and compassionate, how much more fully or openly can we process, be, and just become when we release that energy, what I call that low vibrational or negative energy of wanting, I call it the blame energy or the justification energy. That's how when we are able to have compassion for ourselves and remember how much more of the true self of who we are comes out from that more open perspective. And that's society doesn't really like to go out of its way to share how vital compassion is, or self-compassion. I mean, if you just turn the news on, which I don't really like to do anymore, it's all about wanting us to feel smaller or to retreat or to justify. But how much more can we really give when we are treating ourselves and our experiences, how we process with compassion? So that's a really, I'm glad we're talking about this today. It's a very vital key element that we need to, it'd be wonderful to have more people bring a lot more of that in.
Well, you say a lot of really good stuff there, Nancy, and I think the concept of compassion, I think it's misunderstood, to be honest. I think that the way I understand compassion, it's not empathy, it's not sympathy, although those emotions, those connections may actually occur when you are engaging in compassion. Compassion to me is a recognition of suffering. It's a recognition of suffering coupled with an empathetic desire to ease that suffering. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that you do anything to actually ease the suffering, but you have that sense of or desire. Part of the challenge that we have, and we've already had many examples here today, situations when we have had a trigger or something happen, and consequently we ended up with a little bit of suffering going on within ourselves. The real healing happens when we ourselves do something about our suffering rather than waiting for someone else to do it. So in some cases, if somebody has a life-threatening situation going on, obviously I'm just going to dive in and do what I can to help. But when it's not life-threatening and someone is expressing pain or suffering, I guess my first question is, well, I understand you've got some suffering going on. Is there something you would like me to do to help you with that suffering? Rather than simply saying, well, I know of a way to solve that problem that worked for me, so I'm going to make it, I'm going to try it for you. I think that to bring compassion, true compassion, we're going to let our ego go out the window and ask the person, what kind of support do you need? And then, if possible, provide that support.
That was beautifully put. That is a great tool that, again, some people, we don't know that we can use that. We're conditioned to want to fix or, quote, give advice that's well-intended, when the best gift is to support them by putting it back in them. How can I support you? I see you in this. There's a lot implied in that asking, because I like your feeling is compassion is that recognition of suffering, because I was feeling that empathy which is compassion, which is understanding another person suffering from you know, from having yourself gone through some stuff, and just sharing that energy rather than, again, having pity or sympathy, that you are acknowledging that you understand the suffering.
I think a lot of people just wish to be listened to and heard.
Yes.
They don't want you to do anything. They just wish to be acknowledged.
Absolutely
And
right.
a lot of it is that I'm just not feeling listened to. And just being an amazing pair of ears. And you may not, I had a client at one time for a metamorphic technique session, and we are not allowed, we've got to be 100% detached. As a practitioner, you cannot get involved. They start talking about what's going on in their life. You are not allowed to give any feedback at all. You can't make suggestions. You're not allowed to do any of that, because you can actually really damage the session. And this particular client talked the whole way through the session, and I couldn't say a word. But at the end of that session, her reaction was, that was perfect. That was exactly what I needed. Because it was for her to sort it out, if you like, in her own mind, her own feelings. She didn't need anybody else's input.
Right.
She needed to listen and talk to herself. And we can get in people's way when we aren't just the ears. And we can do that for ourselves too.
Sounds like we
Isn't
have a topic for our next discussion.
Isn't it amazing though how sometimes, I've noticed this, like we cannot know what to do or say, or we're confused about a situation, and then we say it out loud to someone else, and as we speak it out loud, the answer comes to us. There is something about vocalizing, and it may just be the energy of the voice, the energy of the sound that's bringing that up. So I'm just noticing my computer is saying it's not plugged in. Oops.
I'm glad we captured that on film.
All of a sudden the screen is like, the computer's going to die.
Yeah, right.
No, so I think that's another part of that, Sarah, is that sometimes when the person is speaking and we're just listening, we're giving them the opportunity to solve it themselves, because that inner knowing can come through.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, any decent coach will do the same thing. There are a lot of coaches out there who love giving advice. Oh, you have this problem? We'll try this. It's like, the doctor and the symptoms thing, But more often than not, as Sarah says, the best advice you can give is, well, what is coming up for you when you try this? What sorts of things happen? How do you feel when you try that, when you try this? Let them explain it. I think questions are fine as long as they are curious questions and they are appropriate to the topic at hand, and they help lead the other person to the kind of answer that they're looking for themselves. So, yeah.
And I think it's okay to talk out loud to yourself, just for this very reason. I do mention in session to people that, our thoughts are powerful, but our voice is so much more powerful. So especially, affirmations. But I think whenever there is something, that we're just challenged with, it's good to speak out loud.
Right. And speaking of affirmations, I've had a great deal of fun with affirmations over the years. And one of the things that I have learned is when someone else writes an affirmation and asks me to recite it, that can be a perfect opportunity for learning for me. Because more often than not, when I am given an affirmation from someone else, I notice my ego mind going on crazy and saying, no, that doesn't work for me. Or I get triggered, or this happens, or that happens. And I'm thinking, that's perfect. It's an opportunity for me to see something that I maybe didn't see before. So affirmations, when you currently don't really believe them, can be a great source of personal information. You can learn a lot about yourself. You can, as Sarah would say, remember the truth about who you are when you try on an affirmation that doesn't quite fit. It doesn't mean you ever have to change your mind and suddenly it'll start working for you. But at the very least, it will help you learn something and remember something about yourself.
So I like to say too that if you can't say I am whatever, you can say I am learning to whatever, or even from our conversation today, I am remembering
Yeah.
that
That's
I
good.
am.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
That's another great tool to use as we are in the process of stepping into who we are, aside from all of the postures and stances and reactions, to know that we know we already have that knowing within us. It's just compassionately stepping down into that and sitting. The gift of silence and being listened to is huge. I know I've learned as well, and as a mom of 4 sons, I love to give that advice, but guess what? How oftentimes did the advice just fall to the ground? It was in the moments of my own journey of learning to just sit and listen was the gift to our sons to grow and develop. In the same with me, the deeper insights come from being listened to rather than given advice or whatnot. So that's a very big tool, being still and silent within our own selves daily and extending that gift to others.
I'd like to go back to this word thing, because many years ago, when I was at the very beginning of my healing journey, I was seeing a psychotherapist, and one of the things she said to me one day was, "We are very good at saying, 'Here, take my advice, I'm not using it.'" Yeah, because we are as human beings, we are extremely good at doing that, and that has stuck with me. And so I never use the word advice when I'm working with clients, customers, whatever you want to refer to them as, because I make suggestions from those things that I have found work for me, that I have used. I do not give advice because advice is normally from those people who won't use it themselves, although it would really be good for them. And so that was a remembering for me. It was just like, yes, share from your own experiences, but advice usually, but then that's this word thing again. It's like the learning, remembering, advice, suggestion, need, want, choose, require, it's what words do we use and what energies do those words have in our lives?
Right.
Can we be kinder to ourselves? Can we have that self-compassion by thinking about the terminology we use on ourselves?
Yeah. Well, this is interesting. I think that when somebody else offers me advice, or I receive any other kind of gift, I think of it as this is the universe trying to tell me something. Now, if I'm ready for it, then I may use it for some purpose. But I've discovered this, or maybe I've remembered it, whatever the word is here. I have learned one way or another that sometimes the universe will deliver me a message one way and I won't even hear it. And then weeks later, months later, years later, I will get exactly the same message delivered in a slightly different package from a slightly different source, and I may hear it. Now, I've had this happen so many times on me in my life now that I can look at it and I say, damn, that person told me exactly the same thing as this person told me 15 years ago. Why didn't I listen to it back then? Oh, I'm beating myself up the way people all tend to do. And I realized, okay, well, there's no point in that, but I guess I wasn't ready for it back then. For whatever reason, I wasn't quite ready for it. And so I don't just dismiss stuff out of hand anymore. I try to just kind of, I don't want to say digest it, but I do kind of, as Nancy says, just sit in the energy of it for a little bit and see how it feels. And then decide whether it's something I want to act on or not. And that's really all we can do, right? We have our feedback that comes to us. We can take what works and we can release the rest. And maybe later we'll come back and look at stuff that we didn't look at before and do something different with it. That's all about growth. That's all about expansion. It's all about raising our awareness and our consciousness and becoming better human beings and becoming more connected to our true self, our true nature.
Thank you, folks, because I've got to go.
Bye, Sarah.
I have loved this, and I really hope that it has supported those that watch and listen, because I know you've said this so many times. This is why we do it, because we hope to support people. So thank you for letting me be a part of this. I found it amazingly interesting and powerful. And I look forward to seeing you all again soon. Bye.
See you later, Sarah.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Well, it's interesting. I was just getting to the point where it feels like it's time to wrap up anyway. Christy, I see you've got something that you'd like to say.
I'll try to be really quick, but one of the points I wanted to make earlier when we were talking about flow is that we focus so much on flow, but there's also the ebb. And I think what you're talking about, David, right there was the ebb. It's like we're in the flow, but sometimes we need to ebb, because in the ebb, we often receive the most rather than in the flow.
True.
So remember, there's not just the flow, there's the ebb too, and really take advantage. When it seems like you're not in the flow, it may just be that there's a gift that's there for you that you need to be paying attention to.
Right. Well, and what Nancy was saying with, being in the silence, being in that, just in the stillness, maybe that's kind of in relation to the ebb portion of the flow. Or I don't know. We're all just kind of riffing here, and it's kind of fun, and I love it. So
Takeaway today, that
that's it.
compassion with just that beautiful gift of self-reflection as a means to show up who we're meant to be and be beautiful lights out in the world.
Beautiful. Well, I think that's it for today, folks. I want to thank you who are here on the live show. Thank you for being here. I'd just like to remind everybody that the recording of this show and all the other shows that we do are on my website at yourlifemasterycoach.com. So you can go and check them out there. And hopefully we'll see you again here on Soul Empowerment for our next episode, which who knows what that'll be about, but it's sure to be another wonderful conversation. Well, if nobody has anything else to say, I'm going to stop the recording and we'll say goodbye for now.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thank you so much for joining us today. Appreciate you being here.